was a big, huge, very modern town with lots of building blocks. So as a country boy, it was a cultural shock. And then I went to England to study more about democratic alternative education. That's my research field. And I did my master's on Summer Hill School and PhD on, I did a PhD course on progressive education movement in England and Europe. And as a foreigner, obviously can't speak English well, and living in London, which is a very megapolitan kind of city, it gives me another chance to look at the world very differently. I felt I'm a very outsider or a minority in many sense. And then I broke my foot 3 weeks ago, and I'm on a wheelchair. It's my first time sitting on a wheelchair, and I can see the world very differently. Yeah, it's very interesting. So, I don't know, quite a lot of Korean says I'm a very mainstream person, went to very good schools and universities in Korea and studied in England, kind of things, but I found myself a very outsider of mainstream and try to look at the world very differently. And that's the first reason why I was involved in democratic education, alternative education. Korea, I mean, the reason why I said I found very connected with the Jane, what Jane said was that Korea has been a colony of Japan until 1945, and then it has been divided into two, north and south, not because of our intention, but because of the superpowers, American and Soviet Union back then. And then we had South Korea had a military dictatorship until late 80s, early 90s. So we have a kind of a very distorted hardship of the history. In my college days, in early 80s and I mean late 80s and early 90s, you may found from the newspapers that about or news channels that about the Korea that students on the street throwing the what do you call it, Molotov cocktail or stones against the police. That was my college days. We fought against the military dictatorship, searching for the social democracy, and finally we got democratically elected governments. Since, well, it depends. It's a bit arguable when is the exactly military, I mean civil government, but yeah, generally early 90s, yeah, we started to get our democratically elected government. And at that time we are more or less fought in a big kind of issues like social democracy, civil government, and social reformation kind of things. And after we got democratically elected government, we started to think, is it now all done? And also the Soviet Union was collapsed. I mean, many students, activists based on the communism. So it was kind of a shift for us to think about what we need to do next after that. So we are more or less starting to think about community, how we can change from the grassroots. And democratic education, alternative education movement in Korea has been linked with that grassroots changes. starting to set up different kind of education, which is the starting point of democratic education, alternative education in Korea. So we started mid-1990s with a handful of schools. Now we have more than 200 alternative schools in Korea, which is, I guess, the most fast-growing alternative education in the world. So, and most of the schools are linked with the community, how to enrich the community cultures. For example, one of my Korean delegations, quite a big young delegations are from one of the democratic school graduates, and they set up a local community project. So what they have learned from the democratic school was really great, but it's fee-paying school, so it's only reached to the parents who can pay the fees. It's not great, big money, but still they have to pay. So they set up